All right, welcome back to another edition of We Rise Fighting Labor podcast. We bring you today's labor news, history, and analysis from the U.S. and around the world. This is a podcast you listen to with your fellow workers organizing on the shop floor. This is a podcast you listen to before walking into your union meeting. As always, I'm Rico Rutia, here with my co-host, Brian Pfeiffer. All right, what's up, everyone? We have a pretty cool episode happening today. Brian is going to kick things off talking about an appeal from the Palestinian General Federation of Trade Unions on the occasion of a year of resistance to genocide. Then he's going to talk about other acts of solidarity being carried out by the UAW Local 2325. That's the United Auto Workers, Local 2325. Also, port workers and community for Palestine and student groups across the nation. He's going to finalize his report with Unite Here's rolling strike and the status of those. I'm going to be covering the Boeing strike, which is currently underway, and also the Longshoreworkers strike, which is looming and could take place as early as October 1st. And we're going to talk about those, how much those strikes, quote unquote, cost the economy and cost the corporation. Actually going to get a little deep into that because I think I just needed it. I needed a little glimmer of hope still during this election campaign, because really, like, what people are putting on my plate as far as options here, I just can't, I can't consume that. And so I'm putting this out there just to let people know or remind people where the worker power is, because these two strikes come with price tags attached, all right? Like, they're talking about how the longshore worker strike is going to cost the economy $5 billion a day. The media is talking about the Boeing strike and how it's going to cost Boeing $100 million a day. And we're going to get into all that because they're not saying that about Kamala voters, and they're not saying that, they never say that about any kind of voting struggle or vote movement to vote. You know, they never talk about stuff. So we got to read into those moments and understand that as being worker power and tap into that and grow that and build a movement around that. And that's why we cover that. So pretty excited to talk about that. One last thing from me is that if you like our show, please go ahead and subscribe, like, share, or do whatever it is you do to keep in touch. You know, we try to produce one show per week. Sometimes we fall a little short, but we love doing this show, so don't want to lose anyone. You know, I am very proud and happy to be doing this podcast. I've noticed that it's a pretty unique podcast. I've checked out many other labor podcasts that are out there, and they're a little too close to institutionalized labor for my taste. I think it's worth listening to these podcasts to understand where those perspectives are at. But this particular podcast is, how shall we say, we lean harder on the class consciousness and make no compromise about that. So if we differentiate ourselves in any way, I would say it's that. And as usual, we like to kick things off with a little bit of music, and Brian is going to go ahead and introduce that for us today, so going to pass the microphone over to him.
Hello again, listeners. We're going to kick off this episode with a song by Miko Marks. Miko Marks is a long-time artist. She works with the Black Opry, which formed around COVID and is now a Black artist across the United States in a variety of different genres. Black Opry, from their website, blackopry.com, states, is home for Black artists, fans, and industry professionals working in country, Americana, blues, and folk music. Country and roots music have been made and loved by Black people since their conception. For just as long, we have been overlooked and disregarded in their genre. Black Opry is changing that. So listeners can go to their website, blackopry.com, and we're going to kick off our show here with a song called Not Be Moved by Miko Marks.
We shall not be broken. We shall not be moved. We shall not be bound or broken. We shall not be moved like a tree planted by the water. We shall not be moved. Early in the morning, we shall not be moved. Late in the evening time, we shall not be moved.
All right, listeners, as we do here at the top of We Rise Fighting, we kick off our coverage with Palestine and the atrocities of the monsters of U.S. and Israel continue. We've seen the attack with the pagers, which have killed numerous people in Lebanon and potentially elsewhere. There's coverage at Palestine Chronicle about that, as well as the Electronic Intifada. And those are independent Palestinian publications that we suggest to read for analysis and updates on what's happening in occupied Palestine and in the general West Asia region. We'll start today with an appeal from the Palestinian General Federation of Trade Unions on the occasion of a year of resistance to genocide. In a previous episode, we read last October when this federation, Palestinian General Federation of Trade Unions, put out their statement appealing to labor unions across the world, but specifically in the United States. This appeal came out within the last week, and it's a longer statement. It can be read at laborforpalestine.net in its entirety, but in short, from an expert, quotes, "Dear trade unionists and professionals in North America, Europe, and around the world, our appeal to you is not just words, but a cry from the depths of wounds and pain, from under the rubble and from among the tears of orphaned, bereaved, and hungry children. We address your consciences to stand together in the face of this significant humanitarian disaster created by the occupation and its sponsors in the West, headed by the U.S., because we believe that the world is not a place for neutrality in the face of injustice, but rather an arena for testing human values and moral principles. Let your solidarity with us be a light in the darkness of bias, and let your courageous positions be the voice of truth in the face of falsehood. We, with our souls and bodies, continue to resist the death that is imposed on us, and we trust that you will continue to raise the banner of solidarity and struggle to stop the aggression and to live a dignified life for a freedom that is not negotiable and for a justice that does not bow to anyone. Long live Palestine and its people, and victory for the working class. Glory to the martyrs of the working class and all martyrs of Palestine, humanity, and freedom. Palestinian General Federation of Trade Unions." That statement, listeners, can be found at laborforpalestine.net. And in another post at laborforpalestine.net on September 17th, there was a picket against anti-Palestinian censorship by New York Legal Assistance Group, whose workers are members of the United Auto Workers 2325, UAW 2325. These local members have been attacked for their Palestinian work. The chair of a better NYLAG, the UAW Local, Cameron Molyneux chapter, says our members will continue to organize for Palestinian liberation and against NYLAG management's repression of workers, free speech against U.S.-backed Israeli genocide, occupation, and apartheid. And more information can be found at UAW 2325 Communications. And Rick will be talking more about some of the actions that's happening by the IAM and port workers from Maine to Houston, international port workers up and down the coasts. Here we're going to mention two upcoming pickets. Demand always, don't move Zim, by port workers and communities for Palestine. They will have a picket on September 20th at 3:30 p.m. and September 23rd at 3:30 p.m. The September 20 picket is in Elizabeth. September 23rd is in Queens. They are organizing through the hashtag StopZIM. And you can find more information at Port Workers and Communities for Palestine. On September 23rd, they say that they're holding our first picket at Always Queens location at 16115 Rockaway Boulevard, Jamaica, Queens, near the JFK Airport. They ask that supporters join them in continuing to build pressure against hashtag always and hashtag ZIM as we expand the picket to their NYC location. And these types of activities have also happened on the West Coast over the years. The statement ends last week. A local trucker sent us a picture of a hashtag ZIM military truck being shipped to quote unquote Israel from the port in Elizabeth. Always Forwarding is a freight forwarding company that dispatches ZIM shipping containers. ZIM is the Zionist entity's largest and oldest shipping company and strong supporter of the genocide. ZIM directly profits from the occupation of Palestinian lands. From 1947 to 49, during the Al-Nakba, ZIM transported settlers, military equipment, and food to the newly formed Zionist entity. Now it even transports to port in Elizabeth. Please share this information widely, and we send solidarity to the port workers and communities for Palestine. And our last item from this week's Palestine Dispatch and articles from laborforpalestine.net, the Divest from Apartheid and Genocide, Berkeley Federation of Teachers for Palestine is working to have their employer divest from bonds and other financial resources in Zionist Israel. Across the United States, students, staff, faculty, and alumni continue many pro-Palestine actions and defense campaigns for those targeted by administrations for their anti-Zionist, pro-Palestine activities. Boycott, divest, and sanction activity also continues. And the Berkeley Federation of Teachers for Palestine in California wrote an open letter to the California State Teachers Retirement System Board of Directors that says, in part, quote, "We, the undersigned educators, organizations, unions, and tax-paying California voters are appalled at Cal STRS, that's the pension system, unethical financial investments. The pension system, the pension fund for educators in California's public education system, owns billions of dollars in investments in weapons manufacturing, shipping, logistics, and fuel companies that facilitate human rights violations around the world, including the ongoing military occupation and genocide of the Palestinian people. Educators committed to the well-being of children and building a better future cannot in good conscience retire on the blood of Palestinian children. We, the undersigned, demand that Cal STRS immediately divests from these assets and end its complicity in these crimes against humanity." And there's more to that letter, but that was a part of it from the Berkeley Federation of Teachers for Palestine. The full letter can be found on laborforpalestine.net. And signaling to our labor news in the United States, before Rick goes into his struggles that he will talk about, as we speak, Unite Here members are on strike at various hotels nationwide. This is very exciting. From various cities across the country, Boston and San Diego and beyond, members are on the move. Unite Here issued a press release today. That's the union that represents these hotel workers across the country. And they issued a release from Boston, Massachusetts, that says, in part, hundreds more hotel workers have walked off the job as another wave of strikes hit the U.S. hotel industry. Nearly 2,000 hotel workers are now on strike at Hilton, Marriott, and Omni hotels in Boston and San Diego, including the largest hotel in Boston and the oldest continuously operating hotel in the country. More strikes could begin soon in other cities. Workers are calling for higher wages, fair staffing and workloads, and the reversal of COVID-era cuts. They are members of the Unite Here union, and they include housekeepers, front desk agents, cooks, dishwashers, servers, bartenders, bellhops, doormen, and more. The release continues. After months of contract negotiations, over 10,000 hotel workers across the U.S. went on strike on Labor Day weekend, most on limited duration strikes that ended after 2 or 3 days. A second wave of strikes followed the next week. Strike issues in all the cities remain unresolved, and negotiations are ongoing. Strikes have been authorized and could begin at any time in Baltimore, Greenwich, Honolulu, New Haven, Oakland, Providence, Sacramento, San Francisco, San Jose, and Seattle, and Kauai. The strikes in Boston at the Omni Parker House, Omni Boston Seaport, Renaissance Boston Seaport Marriott, and Westin Boston Seaport Ambridge began today, September 19th, and will last 3 days. The strike in San Diego at the Hilton San Diego Bayfront began on September 1 and will continue until workers have won their contract. A full list of struck hotels can be found at unitehere.org. That's UNITEHERE.org. Union members are asking members of the public to not cross their picket lines. Union members are asking members of the public to not cross their picket lines. Supporters are also encouraged to share the National Unite Here communications, Local 26, and other locals information, such as videos and photos. More information about how to support is at unitehere.org. Unitehere.org. Solidarity forever with our fellow workers at these hotels. We are excited about their strike, and we are with them in their demands, and the filthy rich hotel operators against the filthy rich hotel operators, and solidarity with the workers all across the country on strike with Unite Here. All right, Rick's going to talk to us about the East and Gulf Coast actions by unions.
Yep, that's right. So, Brian, before we got on and started recording, I was telling you that, this week I just needed a little bit of hope, a little glimmer of hope for myself. And so I was excited to look into what was happening with both the ILA strike, or looming ILA strike. That's the International Longshore Workers Association, on the East and Gulf Coasts. And I also wanted to look at the Boeing strike. So that's what I'm going to be covering today. Let's kick things off with the Gulf strike, with the longshore workers strike. I came across an article on foxbusiness.com, and the headline reads, "Biden won't block potential port strikes on East and Gulf Coast." Now, that makes sense, right? We're here, just 2 months, not even 2 months away from Election Day, and he wants to count on that union support, or Kamala Harris wants to count on the union support. So it makes sense not to crush this strike, right? I mean, the railway strike made sense. That was in the middle of the administration. He could get away with it. He did that. He leaned into the Railway Act in order to squash the railway strike. But right now, it's September. November's right around the corner. It just doesn't make the same sense, right? So read about these, and also I focused specifically on something. I focused specifically on articles that talked about the cost of these strikes. If you're a regular listener, you know that we've done this before, specifically with the railway strike, because during that time, we were hearing in the news media that the railway strike would cost the economy $2 billion a day. And so we did an entire show on that, looking how that number came to being, where the media gets that number from, and how they use it. And we looked into Anderson Economic Group, and that's essentially the same process that I had here. So if you're interested in that process and what we did back then, go ahead and check out the episode called Anderson Economic Group, or anything relating to the railway strike, because we definitely went deep into how they get those numbers, and it turns out they're pretty much bogus. So looked for those same numbers this time around. And again, let's start with this one. Again, Biden won't block potential port strikes on East and Gulf Coast. That's from foxbusiness.com. And the article reads as follows. A potential strike by East Coast and Gulf Coast dock workers could cost the U.S. economy $5 billion a day, J.P. Morgan found. Also, yes, did I go to the J.P. Morgan website? Yes. Did I try to find whatever research piece backed up this $5 billion a day claim? Yes, of course. I spent about 20 minutes doing that, which isn't an eternity, but it is a good chunk of time for looking for a piece of research and not being able to find it. Usually I can find it in less time, but whatever, JP Morgan, you have it hidden somewhere, I'm presuming. But anyway, they're telling us that the strike is going to cost $5 billion per day. And as we've said in the past, and we'll continue to say, what costs less than $5 billion a day? Giving the workers a raise, giving the workers good health care, giving the workers whatever demands they need to get by and live, and maybe live even comfortable lives. Why don't you give them that instead of, bringing the economy to a place where it's going to suffer a $5 billion a day disruption or loss, But hey, I'm not at the negotiating table for the USMX, the Association of Bosses here. The article continues. President Biden doesn't plan to intervene to prevent a strike at ports on the East Coast and in the Gulf of Mexico if dock workers fail to negotiate a new labor contract before the deadline on October 1st, an administration official said on Tuesday. Now, again, here, I'm going to pause there for a second because we've made this point before too, and it's really frustrating when you have all these companies, all these corporations and CEOs and business leaders going out there like thumping their chest and talking about laissez-faire capitalism and how government has to stay out of business and it needs to stay out of the free market and the invisible hand and all that jazz. But when it comes to a strike, they lean into the Taft-Hartley Act. They lean into the Railway Act. They lean into President Biden, Kamala Harris, the senators and representatives in Congress to crush that strike. So when the strike is on, it's not the same tone, not the same flex. The article continues. The International Longshoremen's Association, the ILA, which is negotiating on behalf of 45,000 dock workers at 36 U.S. ports from Maine to Texas that collectively handle about half of the country's seaborne imports, has warned its members are prepared to stop work if they don't have a new contract by the deadline. Now, let me pause there one more time. It's 45,000 workers. 45,000 workers, and their labor can disrupt $5 billion a day worth of economic trade or whatever. Think about that. This is what I was telling Brian. Like, they're not talking like that about Kamala Harris supporters. They're not talking about anything like that when it comes to a parliamentary struggle, right? A voting struggle. They don't talk about stuff like that. They don't talk about like how this vote will cost the economy $5 billion a day. No, it's 45,000 workers. This is 45,000 workers, Brian. The U.S. workforce is 170 million people. All right. For 45,000 dock workers to cost the economy, quote unquote, $5 billion a day, we need to pay attention to that. Again, the media is telling us where the worker power is. They're pointing that out. Yeah, they may have some goofy numbers. Yeah, we may get deep into it and like look at the research analysis, how they came up with the $5 billion day figure and take it apart and realize that it's bogus. But still, I like to use that number to let people know what their labor is worth because people don't think in those terms or oftentimes don't think in those terms. And even if the numbers are completely bogus, the media is still announcing that they don't want this disruption. That's how we can translate that. So needed to highlight both the $5 billion a day potential figure and the fact that it's 45,000 dock workers. It's not a million. It's not 2 million. It's 45,000 dock workers whose labor has that power. And the media is telling us that. So wanted to highlight that and then wrap up this article real quick. The ILA's current contract with the United States Maritime Alliance, the USMX, again, that's the bosses alliance there, expires on September 30th, setting up a potential strike beginning next month if the two sides don't reach an agreement. Presidents have the authority to intervene in labor disputes that pose a threat to national security or safety under a law known as the Taft-Hartley Act. Now, I'm going to pause there. Excuse me for a second, because this is another thing that we've talked about on this show before, the Taft-Hartley Act. Folks, if you want to read a list of all the stuff that is good and effective in the world of labor struggle, go ahead and read the Taft-Hartley Act, because that's the act that makes a lot of this stuff illegal. All right. So if you want a list of all the stuff that is good and effective, strikes, boycotts, secondary boycotts, general strikes, stuff like that, yeah, it's in the Taft-Hartley Act and it's illegal. Article continues. A law known as the Taft-Hartley Act, which lets the president impose an 80-day cooling off period under which workers go back to work while negotiations continue. However, the Biden administration has signaled it doesn't plan to use that authority if the Longshoremen's Union goes on strike on East and Gulf Coast ports. Negotiations between the ILA and USMX are at an impasse over a range of issues, including wages and benefits, as well as a cap on the automation of port terminals. So there you have it. Again, 45,000 workers able to disrupt production like that. I mean, that to me speaks of a serious artery. That to me speaks of a jugular that we're talking about here. You know, when 45,000 workers can quote unquote cost the economy $5 billion a day, you know, this is right before this holiday season, before people really start digging into their Christmas and Thanksgiving purchases and holiday purchases and, you know, all the other whatever holidays are taking place late in the year. You know, so this is a very strategic time to call a strike. So we're going to keep you updated on that. And now we're going to move on to a strike that is already happening, the strike at Boeing. And same thing, you know, I looked specifically for articles that talked about how much the Boeing strike is going to cost, right? And from that, I got several news articles, and obviously not going to read several news articles to you, but I will share some excerpts and some headlines that came from looking for articles that talked about how much the Boeing strike would cost. Okay, the Associated Press came out and said that the suspension of airline production could prove costly for the beleaguered Boeing, depending on how long it runs. The last Boeing strike in 2008 lasted 8 weeks and cost the company about $1 million daily in deferred revenue. A 1995 strike lasted 10 weeks. Before the tentative agreement was announced Sunday, Jefferies aerospace analyst Sheila Kayaglu, I'm probably totally messing up that last name, estimated the strike would cost the company about $3 billion based on the 2008 strike plus inflation and current airline production rates. All right, $3 billion, $100 million daily. You know, I highly doubt that the demands of Boeing workers amount to $100 million a day or $3 billion throughout the course of the life of the contract. But again, you know, these are the contradictions that we have to struggle with under capitalism. A Reuters headline read that the strike could cost Boeing $100 million plus in daily revenues, analysts say. And I took a little bit from that article, which read Boeing could lose over $100 million in daily revenue until it reaches a settlement with its union that represents more than 30,000 workers, analysts said on Monday. Again, $100 million a day, 30,000 workers. This is Boeing. This is Boeing that makes aircrafts. This is Boeing that makes military material. Like, this is a big deal, especially right now, especially with Palestine, especially when Kamala Harris, you know, doesn't even entertain it. You know, she speaks in front of AIPAC. Like, yeah, I guess, Brian, you know, just I can only hope, I can only envision a labor movement where this strike was certainly for economic gain, for the economic comfort of these workers, but also against genocide, against, you know, what these companies, what this duopoly is doing in Palestine. But that's part of why we have this podcast, this tiny little glimmer of hope for you to listen to, maybe talk about and spread the word. Let me continue on with the article. The Seattle area Boeing workers who build the plane maker's most popular 737 MAX and other jets in factories in the U.S. West Coast went on strike after rejecting their first full contract in 16 years last week. A prolonged strike could cost several $billion, fraying the plane maker's already strained finances and threatening a downgrade of its credit rating. Oh no. North Coast Research, here we go. North Coast Research is the name of it. North Coast Research estimates the total impact of the strike could reach $3 billion or more. And here's a quote. Quote, Boeing will most likely remove 30 to 35 jets from the original production plan, resulting in a loss of $102 million in daily revenue, said Chris Allen, an analyst at North Coast Research. Okay, I also geeked out on that, folks. I went and looked at North Coast Research. I went to their website. I Googled them. I could not find, um, their research analysis piece, their research document, their methodology on how they come up with these numbers. That's okay. That's okay. We can take these numbers and run with it ourselves. We can take these numbers and talk about how 30,000 workers will cost Boeing $100 million a day. We can talk about how the labor of 30,000 workers is worth $100 million per day. We can still run with it. Okay, CNN also came out with something. Its headline said the strike could cost Boeing more than $1 billion, but that could be the least of its problems. Fortune magazine headline: Boeing strike could cost $3.5 billion if it drags on as workers feel, quote, a lot of bad blood, unquote. So those are the headlines. Those are the excerpts. That is the rhetoric. This gives me hope because it tells me the power of 45,000 workers, the power of 30,000 workers. This in contrast to this electoral struggle that we're watching right now, right? Which it doesn't come with that kind of rhetoric. It's fear-based. You don't want Trump, right? You better vote for Kamala Harris. And that's one of the main driving engines of this election campaign. So I wanted to report on something that actually gave me hope, something that I don't know. Again, we've been covering this. We've been doing this podcast now. We're into our second year, and it's consistent in that respect, in that these are the things that we look for. We look for the jugglers, we look for the worker power, and we don't see that in presidential campaigns. And so this is our contribution to that dialogue, and hopefully you find it insightful as well, and go home thinking about it. Okay, Brian, now back to you.
All right, thanks, Rick. As listeners that have been listening to our episodes for a while know that we take sides here at We Rise Fighting. So in our reports today, we mentioned how to support Unite Here and others engaging in a variety of different labor actions and in support of Palestine. And in addition to Rick's report on Boeing, ways that can be help really support the workers on strike, photos and videos are available at the International Association of Machinists Facebook page. There's also a petition available at goiam.org. That's goiam.org. That's the machinist website and their Facebook page. And it is extremely helpful when workers, especially they're on strike, to support their strike fund, even if you can give $1. I think Rick and I would agree. It's probably more important to give to a strike fund than something else. And while the workers are on picket line, the ABC basics, bringing food, bringing water. It's starting to get cold outside in various regions of the country. Spreading the word in your local, if you're a member of a union or your community organization, and sharing the photos and videos on your communications and social media. This is really important to win strikes, to bolster the workers on the line. And it also gives us fellow workers different tactics that we can use and strategies that we can use and learn from each other to beat the bosses on all the struggles that we're in. All right, solidarity, Rick.
Right on, everyone. Thank you once again and always for listening. You know what? Right now, our schedule is a little unpredictable. So if you're a fan and you like this show, just go ahead and subscribe. That way you get updates on every time that we post and every time we do a show. Thank you, everyone, again for listening. We're going to come back at you soon. Going to keep you posted on these strikes and what's happening and all that. Love and solidarity to all. Take care, everyone. Have a good night.